Hey everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Title Scoop. So we are continuing our talk on the homeowner's policy, and this week we're going to talk about the differences between a standard owner's policy and the homeowner's policy. We're going to be talking about the 2021 since I know those are the forms everyone will be moving to if they haven't already. So just have that in mind when we're talking about the different coverages because it is a little bit different than the prior homeowner's policy. So as we stated last week, there are 10 covered risks with the owner's policy, and with the homeowners, there's 33. And we're going to go over some of those differences today, as well as some of the things they have in common. One thing that I wanted to point out is that I thought was really, I think it's actually interesting and really helpful for homeowners, is that the homeowner's policy actually has sort of a built-in inflation because it increases 10% each year up to 150% of the policy. So again, kind of built in for inflation to increase the value. The other thing that's a little bit interesting with the homeowner's policy that's similar to other types of insurances is there are some deductibles that apply. And if you haven't looked at the homeowner's policy, take a look at it. You can look at Alta, you can look, probably you have the form already, but it will show you the different deductibles. And we're gonna go over a little bit, touch on that today. So what do they both cover? Well, the things that you know that they're going to cover is we're talking about if title is being vested in someone other than in Schedule A of the policy. Both cover that. Forgery, fraud, duress, impersonation, incompetency covered. If there's liens or encumbrances, right? There's a mortgage that was missed. That's going to be covered. If there's a document that's not executed properly, that's going to be covered. Defective recordings, defect in the notarization, including remote online notarization, since that's something that we do pretty frequently now. We also cover that there is legal access. And if there are restrictive covenants limiting the use, and then last, both have gap coverage. So those are the things that we have in common. The other thing too, just to note, is both of them cover if the owners, as long as the owner has the property, right? So as long as I own the property, I have coverage. And that also covers if I transfer it to an estate planning entity, say a trust, or if I pass away and someone inherits it, then that also is covered. But remember, the one thing I want to make sure that we talked about last week, and I'm going to say it again, is the homeowners only covers residential property, and it only covers if it's a natural person or an estate planning entity. So an owner's policy covers a little bit more, right? You can have an LLC, you can have a corporation, but the homeowner's policy is very strict about who gets coverage. Now, as most of you probably know, we don't remove general exceptions on the owner's policy without some extra information. The homeowner's policy, we are going to do some due diligence, but there are some that actually are covered risks on the homeowner's policy. The ones there are 5 that I came up with, and those are the parties in possession, unrecorded easements that affect the property, encroachments and boundary line disputes that would be disclosed by a survey, mechanics liens, and then taxes or special assessments that aren't shown as liens by the public record. So those are 5 general exceptions that are covered by the homeowner's policy that are not covered by the owners. Now you might be asking yourself, how can we give this extra coverage? Like I said, next week we will go over some of the guidelines for issuing a homeowner's policy, just so that you know there is a little bit extra that we need to do and make sure we're kind of crossing our T's and dotting our I's to make sure that we have the extra coverage and we can provide it. Now that we've gone over what they have in common, we're going to go over what is different. So what does the homeowner's policy give additional coverage for that the owner's does not? And I came up with a list, and there's quite a few. I don't know if I'm going to hit all of them, but I just want to go over the ones that kind of stick out to me. And I would really encourage everyone, take a homeowner's policy and take an owner's policy, sit it side by side, and just look at it because you can see the differences because, like I said, 10 covered risks versus 33, pretty easy to look and see what those differences are. So the ones that are covered by the homeowner's policy: actual vehicular and pedestrian access. Again, that's not what we cover on the regular owner's policy. Loss of title due to a prior violation of a CC&R. Now you can also, there's some limited coverages. So you can get limited coverage if you can't obtain a building permit, but that is one where you would have to pay a deductible. You can also get limited coverage if you have to remedy or remove an existing structure, either for a violation use as far as zoning goes. If you can't get if the proper permit was not pulled when the building was built, or if you have an existing structure that is encroaching into an easement or a setback line, another limited coverage that you can get with a deductible, and there will be a deductible that's in place there. If you cannot use the land for single family residence because such use violations if you can't use the land for a single family residence because that use violates an existing zoning or law regulation, then that's a covered risk that we have. Let's see, I know I'm looking down a lot. I have notes because this is all pretty, a lot of words when we're talking about policies. If there's damage to the existing structure due to an exercise of an existing right to use an easement, and that could be just regular use, or if you have, say, minerals and they're on the surface and they're trying to extract minerals, that would be covered if there's an easement in place. If someone tries to enforce a discriminatory covenant, if you receive supplemental taxes, because say you have new construction and there was a tax that should have been in place and you get it later, that's actually covered. If the owner has a loss because the residence is not located at that address, again, we talked about that this is we're giving location coverage, that would be covered. And the interesting thing too, I think this is really cool, is if there is a claim covered by the policy and you can't live in your property, the policy will cover substitute rent or relocation expenses. So that's something that's huge in my opinion. Last, and we talked a little bit about this last week, there are post-policy coverages that are for future things that could happen. The biggest one that pops out to me is if there's an encroachment of a neighbor's building onto your land, that actually can be covered under this policy. Some of the others are as if there's forgery, impersonation, ownership claims. Those are all things that can happen in the future and that they can be covered. Again, you want to read the fine print to make sure they are, or talk to your underwriter if you're not sure. All right, so that's all the coverages. I know that was a lot of stuff, but again, I really encourage you to compare the two policies because it's really interesting to see the differences. And next week, we'll talk about the guidelines when you're asked to issue the homeowner's policy. All right, with that, we'll see you next week.